Good afternoon and welcome to the May 22nd meeting of the Columbia Rotary Club. Thank you for being here. And it's not working? Nope. Try that. Is that working? Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for being here. It's good to see all of the regulars, and we have a few folks that haven't been here in a while that are back today, and that's great to see as well. So thank you, and we'll begin with Rusty and Jim and the National Anthem. Thank you. Bob Crutchfield will lead us in our invocation.
Kind of like you weren't sure what to
You did a switch on me at the last minute. It threw me off.
We got a lot of switches. I told you to have health and happiness, but I just want you to know at the last minute I asked Rusty and he agreed to do it, so be mindful of that. Be mindful also of the fact that there's some important dates around us. We got Memorial Day next weekend. We won't be here. National Day of Prayer has already passed, and sometimes we don't say enough about those things. So how about bowing your head with me and let me say a prayer that hopefully will focus on those areas. Almighty God, you are the God of heaven and earth. We honor you today. We come before you praying for our beloved community and country. We have strayed far from your principles and from your plans for this country. Help us to find our way back to your path to righteousness. We pray for our leaders. We pray that they will take a serious look at our personal integrity, their personal integrity. We pray that they will become dissatisfied with any area in their personal character that is in rebellion to you. Inspire them to be men and women of prayer. Inspire them to passionately pray for wisdom. Inspire them to be hungry for your guidance. Inspire them to rise up with godly boldness and determination to be the best leader they're capable of being. Almighty God, we lift up to you the needs of the brave military men and women, those presently serving our veterans. Draw our attention to their needs. Show us how to cooperate with you in meeting these needs. Forgive us for often overlooking the needs of our nation's heroes. Forgive us for putting their health needs and their financial needs on the back burner. Remind our leaders, remind each of us to treat our veterans and our current military benefits with the honor, respect, and appreciation that they deserve. Almighty God, today we take this opportunity to rededicate ourselves to you. We want to spend our days walking before you in integrity and obedience. We want to show love and respect toward you and toward each other. Today we dedicate ourselves to the goal of listening to your voice more closely. Almighty God, you have given us a great country. We thank you for our freedom and our liberty. We thank you for our beautiful land and for our natural resources. And we thank you for giving us a nation of men and women with the capacity to work together to build a better future through strong bonds of cooperation and unity. We also bless this food and nourish our bodies. Bless thy service. In Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Earhart. We'll come up and introduce visiting Rotarians and guests. And we have a volunteer, Richard. Will you do that? Microphone.
Noah Harris, if you would stand, he is not a visiting Rotarian, but he is a potential member, so he's visiting us today, so please welcome him. He's a custom database designer, and he lives in Hopkins. Thank you, Noah, for coming, and you're welcome. And if there are any other people visiting this morning, Milton Moore is going to assist me, so please stand. And
I'm Doug Stone. I'm pleased to introduce two guests today. Michael Whelan is an intern with us. He's a senior at University of South Carolina. He's an ER major. He's a marketing intern with us at the Boy Scouts of America. He happens to be an Eagle Scout. Also with me today is Eddie Massey. Eddie's a senior at Claflin University, and he's a Scout Reach director with us, with our organization, with an AmeriCorps program. I think it's interesting also that Noah's an Eagle Scout. We're sitting with the past president of our board, Michael Kapp. Dottie's the mother of an Eagle Scout, and we're also here with the president, the current president of our board, Judge Joe Anderson. Pretty neat. So please welcome Michael and Eddie.
I'm happy to welcome today Shannon Baker. Shannon is the marketing manager for Service Master Fire and Water Restoration, and I met her. She was visiting along with another Rotarian from Florence, who was her boss, when we were at the convention center. So we're happy to have her with us today.
I'm Jerry Bright. Today I'm pleased to introduce my wife, Pat, who wanted to hear every little tidbit that Fritz gave us about Fort Jackson.
I'm Libby Gober, and I'm delighted to have as my guest today my son, Bud Murphy. He's been here a couple of times before, and his friend, Charlene Ciani, and they are both here to hear our speaker.
I'm Milton Moore, and I have as my guest today Josh Ard, who works with my company, Employer HR Group. And Josh is originally from Florence, lives here now, and of the Ard family over in Florence. Josh Ard.
I'm Roger Stroop. I'm pleased to have as my guest Dave Cinema. He's the former director of the State Arts Commission and the State Museum. He hired me at the State Museum, very thoughtful thing to do. He also was my sponsor in Columbia Rotary in 1979.
okay, and John has a yes, and I'm done.
Thank you. Steve, please stand. I'd like to introduce my guest, Steve Arsenault. Steve's visited us before, moving to Columbia, and we welcome him. He's a past Rotarian, and glad to have you here. Thank you. I'd also like to mention the fact that Bill Clowney is here today. Bill lives in Charleston. Bill, if you would stand. Moved to Charleston. He's been a long-time member of the club, past president of this club, district governor, and moved to Charleston and looked around at clubs down there, and he said there's nothing to compare to Columbia Rotary Club, so he's retained his membership with us and comes to visit occasionally. And Bill told me he will be going to the conference this year. It'll be his 19th straight international conference. That's a dedicated Rotarian right there. I'm sure there's something else we got to do right now.
John, can you swap microphones?
Okay, this one's still not working well enough. It keeps going. It keeps going off. A little light goes off. Sorry about that. Okay, is that better? That one working? Okay. Rusty the Pass is going to do our health and happiness for us today. That will be exciting. I guarantee you that.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to be called on your cell phone as you walk out the door to go to Rotary or actually to do a couple of errands before you get to Rotary and be asked to do health and happiness. Let me go back inside and see if I can find some foolishness. But we do have some real news. I didn't get a chance to call anybody, so I don't know anything about the old people in the club. But I'm delighted to see Bill Clowney here. Bill, it's great to have you with us again. I'm told that Ann Matthews had given us the information that Hal Salisbury, who's a past district governor, died over the weekend. So we certainly want to keep his family in our prayers. I'm told that Bobby Capp is going for some treatments this week, that he's doing better. He has a great attitude, and he is convinced that he's going to beat this thing that is trying to take him down. Ben Matthews, son of Glenn Matthews, is graduating this week from Dreher High School and will be going to North Greenville College. And I was also made aware, is Bernie May back here? Not here, maybe he'll be here in a few minutes. Bernie's son, Bernard Rhett Maybank IV, received his BA degree in government from Wofford yesterday, and I was privileged to go to Wofford the other day. I think it was Tuesday of last week. Accompanied my sister. Her granddaughter was being inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, and they had an award ceremony before that. And she got some kind of award, but Bernie's son also got some kind of award, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but anyway, there was only a few of them that got awards, and he was one of them, and so bullied Bernie's son.
He's an honor graduate.
Okay, he's an honor graduate from Wofford.
Well, I know that yesterday they had the 50th class reunion walk with the 2017 class reunion. I'm not going to say which one I was in, but I was in one.
I understand. Yeah. Well, when we went into the Phi Beta Kappa induction ceremony, I asked them if that was like SAE, but they thought not. So
Definitely not.
anyway, also there was a tremendous fundraising event here in Columbia yesterday for Adventure that was orchestrated by our very own Margaret Clarkson, and some of us here in this group were cooks, the 100 men who cook for kids, and I'm going to call their names and ask them to stand, along with Margaret Clarkson, who orchestrated the whole thing. Mason Hardy, I cooked, Matt Kennel, Andrew Clarkson, who kind of cheated because he cooked with his brother-in-law and his friend Chris Ray, and they got all the tips, but that's okay. And John Dozier, Elliot Powell, and Skip Holbrook. Now, we also, I think, at least we used to have the mayor and the sheriff as honorary members, and they were also there. Margaret says it was a great success, and our hats are off to you. Also, we had Alex English, Xavier McDaniel, Aubrey Jenkins. I mean, it was a real cast of characters from the city of Columbia. Just quickly, I'd like to run a couple of things by you. Number one, there was a Mensa convention in San Francisco. Many of you familiar with Mensa. I'm sure it's a national organization for people whose IQs are in excess of 140. And so several of the members went out to lunch at a local cafe. And when they sat down, one of them discovered that the salt shaker contained pepper and the pepper shaker contained salt. So they started talking about how they could swap the contents of the 2 shakers without spilling any, using only the implements at hand. Clearly, this was a job for Mensa minds. The group debated the problem and presented several ideas, finally came up with a brilliant solution involving a napkin, a straw, and an empty saucer. So they called the waitress over, ready to dazzle her with their solution. "Ma'am," they said, "we couldn't help but notice that the pepper shaker contains salt and the salt shaker contains pepper." Before they could finish, the waitress interrupted, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." She leaned over the table, unscrewed the caps on the 2 shakers, and switched them. There was dead silence at the Mensa table. Kind of reminds you of Washington, D.C., doesn't it? And another one that perhaps would remind you of Washington, D.C., maybe a little bit. Sometimes management gets a little ahead of itself. There was a steel company feeling it was time for a shake-up and hired a new CEO. The new boss was determined to get rid of all the slackers in the company. On a tour of the facilities, the CEO noticed a guy leaning against a wall. The room was full of workers, and he wanted to let them know he meant business. He asked the guy, he said, "How much money do you make a week?" A little surprised, the young man responded that, "Well, I make about $400 a week." The CEO said, "Wait right here." He walked back to his office, came back in a couple of minutes, and handed the guy $1,600 in cash and said, "Here's 4 weeks' pay. Now get out and stay out. Don't come back." Feeling pretty good about himself, the CEO looked around the room and asked, "Does anyone want to tell me what that goofball did here?" From across the room, a voice said, "He's the pizza delivery guy from Domino's." I want to leave you with one thing, and I hope I can pull this off. But since we last met, our President John has had a birthday. And so if you would join me, give me a moment to get over to the piano, and I'm going to try to lead you in happy birthday. Ready? Here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you.
You get to a certain age, and I guess you just celebrate being here one more year, and I'm in that celebration mode. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rusty, for thinking of that. Before we get into our program, I want to ask Alan Roberson to come up for a minute. Alan is chairman of our Youth Exchange Committee. He also does our ambassadorial scholar work as well. And so he obviously likes bringing scholars into the country and sending them out. And our club has not participated in Rotary Youth Exchange Program for a number of years. And we're reactivating that program, and Alan's going to tell you a little bit about it.
Thank you, President John. I just want to briefly introduce someone to you, and I'm real happy and delighted to have her here. Allison Ford is a member of the Lexington Rotary Club, but more importantly, she is a point person for Rotary District 770 Youth Exchange Program. And she's helped make this a success throughout the state and in the Low Country especially. And she's got a special guest with her today. And after her presentation, President John, through his efforts, which have been considerable to get our program going again in this club, will have a quick presentation for her. Allison?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We are co-sponsoring a student who will be incoming to the U.S. next year from Belgium. Is that correct?
That's correct.
She will not be lodging with us in Columbia, but we are the sponsor for her to be here, which gives us the opportunity to send a student out from our club the following year. So I'm going to present Allison with this check in sponsorship of our new incoming student, and she'll tell us a little bit about that.
Great, thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here to accept this sponsorship. You guys will be sharing a student with the Mount Pleasant Club. You're sharing because you are sponsoring her to be able to be financially sponsored, which includes allowance, cost while she's here. But in the future, this actually begins to jumpstart your program for what is going to be a 2-year process. So this year, you'll get to know Kathleen. She's going to come. Alan said, you know, let's get her in the club so you guys can meet her and know what it's like to have an exchange student. But this fall, you'll actually start to recruit your own student to send overseas for 2018 and 19. And then at that same time, true to the name, you will receive a student. So you will have an exchange student here in your club, going to your schools. And we really, really appreciate that. So this is just the beginning. It marks the very beginning of at least a 2-year process, and I hope you guys will continue on and on. I come, of course, being involved with Rotary Youth Exchange since 2004. And in that capacity, I've helped to run the program, but I've also had the opportunity to be a host mom. And oftentimes we hear the hardest part about running this program is finding host families. And having been a host family many times, including this year to Serena from France, and I'm going to let her say hello to you as well. It's the best thing that our family has done. So I encourage you to think about people that would want to be host families. Have them talk to real host families, people who've done it for a long time. And we will be honest with them and talk about all the good and sometimes the challenging, but more importantly, Rotary Youth Exchange is different than other programs because of the support that we give to the clubs, the exchange officers, and to those host families. And we hear that over and over and over again from people who've done exchanges through other programs. So know that you will have that support from district, you will have that support from here in Lexington as our family and our club continues to be a part of Youth Exchange as well. But I'd like to introduce Serena. Serena is from France, and I'll let her tell you just a little bit about her exchange.
Good morning, I'm Serena Bolen and I'm from France. I'm 17 years old and I've been in USA 9 months. I've been in Lexington. I have 2 host families, so Alison is my first host mom. I want to say that my exchange year has been great for me. It literally changed me in all good things. And I want to also say that it's good things for the student, but it's also a good thing for the host families. Because I came here and I knew nobody, and now I have 2 families that I consider like my real parents, my real brother, my real sister, and I know that I'm gonna have always, I'm always gonna see them, even if I'm leaving in 2 months. Like they're coming see me in next year. They're coming in France see me. So I think it's just great for the student, but also for the host family. I hope everybody, every student should do that. Thank you.
I wanted to read to you just one thing about Kathleen. She is from Belgium, as I said, and she writes, the question is, what do you specifically hope to accomplish as an exchange student, both during your exchange and when you return? And she writes, I will try to discover other people, their habits, the country, history, and the way of life. I hope to have good marks in my new school and to be included fast in my new family and to pass wonderful moments with them. I think that I'll be more mature and independent. So she has great goals and she looks forward to meeting all of you. So we will bring her this fall, and thank you so much for the sponsorship, and I look forward to working with you guys over the next several years to have one of your own.
That's wonderful, and I'm so happy that our club, being the biggest club and our largest club in our district, can be involved in this program again. There are 35 exchange students right now, either coming into the country or going out of the country at the present time in the school year that has just finished. Allison told me that number stays about the same in the mid-30s every year. We used to be active in that, and hopefully we'll be active again, be participating and have the pleasure of an international student who will be part of our club as well in the future. So I'm next going to introduce Roger Stroop to introduce our speaker for the day.
Thank you, President John. It's my privilege to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Fritz Hamer. Fritz has a BA degree from Acadia University in Nova Scotia, an MA and a PhD from the University of South Carolina, focusing on Southern and South Carolina history. I had the privilege and the intelligence to hire him at the State Museum in 1986 as we were getting ready to open that facility. He did about half the exhibits on the history floor. I did the other half. Since that time, he has been working in South Carolina history. He has published books on South Carolina, the Navy Yard in Charleston, on football in South Carolina, and on both World War I and World War II. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fritz Hamer.
Thank you, Roger. It's good to be with you all here today. I will try to keep my remarks brief, but of some interest to you. I got interested in the topic of World War I and Camp Jackson long before I did this exhibit that's now at the Confederate Relic Room and Military Museum. And I think that it's important for all of us to consider World War I and its impact not only at the time, but on our current lives today, because it has a great deal of influence that we often overlook. So we'll look a little bit at how Camp Jackson evolved, who are the units in World War I that trained there, and its impact on the community of Columbia and Columbia's impact on Camp Jackson. So, this is a picture of downtown Columbia in about 1912. The city of Columbia had roughly around 25,000 people. So it was slightly smaller than it is today. But this was the center of town. And throughout the post-Civil War period, South Carolinians and Columbia were looking for ways to improve the economy. And as you know, if you know your history, as most South Carolinians do, it took a long time for our state and this city to recover from the devastation of the Civil War. So as the war clouds began to come over the horizon from Europe, beginning in 1914, there were certain people here in Columbia that realized this nation needed to prepare for a possible conflict. And by the spring of 1917, city fathers had been lobbying the War Department since 1916 to bring a military installation here into Columbia. And one of the key leaders in this movement was Edwin Robertson. He was a native of Columbia, a Yale graduate who was a bank president here in Columbia, also was the main owner behind the tram system that had been built here in the 1890s. So he was looking out for ways to improve Columbia, and one of those was to bring a military installation to train troops that would help the businesses here in the city. And he lobbied for this with some other city leaders from 16 until the spring of 17. Some of the things he led was to help encourage the War Department, was to actually help purchase some of the land that the military would need to the tune of $50,000. He, of course, contributed a good bulk of that money. With his efforts, in May of 17, the War Department, the future General MacArthur actually announced it, Columbia was one of the sites. This would be, of course, one of about 32 around the nation. And, of course, the Southeast was a prime place because the mild climate permitted training to go with very little delays because of weather issues. Land was cheaper here, and there was labor that was more affordable. So this was what the War Department had been working on, a general compound for the troops. And they were very similar in their general design, but then they had to be adapted to the specific environments. And if you're all familiar, I'm sure where Fort Jackson is today, it began around where Fort Jackson Boulevard and the entrance to Fort Jackson is today. The gentleman that led this effort was a Major Cooper, who was, sorry Citadel folks, he was a VMI graduate who had then studied engineering at MIT and then had worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad until about 1916 when the government recruited him to work in the quartermaster's section. And after some intensive training with the bureaucracy of the Army, he was assigned to oversee the construction of Camp Jackson. And so this is what Camp Jackson's site looked like before major construction began. You're familiar with the sandhills. Well, this is a classic example. The place had a few small farms. It had a sawmill on it and some cemeteries. And the government had only a few weeks to buy these people out and then begin construction. And so Cooper went out there for the first time in the middle of June of 17, and this is what he saw. It was a major task, to say the least. They also had to reconfigure Gills Creek. So here you see some of the diversions that were going on, a massive project. And they had to build a trestle because in 17, of course, your major source of transportation was railways. And also, unfortunately, our road system was hardly existing in 1917. That's when the State Highway Department actually was founded. But the actual building of highways of some sort didn't begin really until after World War I. So railways were significant, and this trestle had to be built in a matter of a few weeks, because this is the way the bulk of the supplies, many of the workers would be brought in to start construction. This small photograph, sorry it didn't come out very well, gives you a sense of the construction as it looked around early July of 1917. Now, the original contractors said they would complete the work by September of 17, because that was when they wanted to start training troops. Well, in fact, the construction would continue really into 1918. But the bulk of the major construction needed was finished in December and then continued through the summer of 1918 with further additions. The workforce, it was small at the beginning, 100 or so in June. By August, they had hired 10,000 workers from all over the state and beyond. Cooper wrote in his extensive diary, that's now part of which is now at the South Carolina Library, that he had even hired people out of New England to help in the construction. And this is an example of the large labor force at payday. Here's some more examples. This is construction in August of 17. It's starting to take form, but as you see, there's a tremendous amount of work still to be done, and the first recruits for training would come the month later. Here you see how the construction looks in the early fall. And this is the completion, as you would have seen probably from Tank Hill, that you know so well if you've been in Camp Jackson, looking down at the completed camp. There were in all about 2,000 structures built, from barracks to a movie theater, hospital, recreation centers of all kinds, and many other things in between. And the other thing that's sort of unusual, maybe for us to think about, was they had what they called a remount station, where they had horses and mules. This is 1917. And the military, some of the military still thought cavalry had an important role to play in warfare. Now, of course, if they'd been paying attention to Europe since the war began, cavalry had quickly been proved to be obsolete. But the Army is slow to change when they have a tradition, and so every major camp in the United States had a remount station similar to this. And as you see, they had about 5,000 animals at its peak. Well, what about units? Well, the ones we'll highlight are the 81st Division, which was made up primarily of Carolinians and Floridians, and numbered, when it was completed, at a little over 20,000 men. And one of the key notes of the 81st Division was they took the nickname Wildcat Division. Now, some people think they picked that up because there's a Wildcat Creek in Cap Jackson, and they picked it up from there. That's unclear. But what's most unique about it is they're the first division in the United States Army to adopt a patch, the Wildcat. And here is an image of that on their division newsletter. This is one of the post-war newsletters. But the Wildcat became very significant to them. And of course, because it was new and unconventional, the Army brass in Washington was not very impressed. They tried to demand that this be removed, but General Bailey, the commander of the division, appealed to higher-ups that this was important for morale. And he still had to defend it when the unit got to Europe in the summer of 18. And when he got to Pershing was impressed. He said, let him keep it. And it became a style for every division to adopt things like, you know, the old Hickory Division, 30th. That was, of course, in remembrance of Andrew Jackson. Another important unit that was to train here was the 371st Regiment. These were made up of African Americans from South Carolina. And as you know, during this period of Jim Crow, whites and blacks did not serve together. So the 371st trained separately from the 81st. And most officers in the 81st and in the Army in general didn't think that African Americans would amount to much. But their commander was determined to make them an elite unit. And as you would expect, most of these people were draftees. His officers and NCOs were new to their commands, and so they had to work extremely hard to learn their trade before they trained these raw draftees. Well, they did their job with determination and pride, and by the middle of the fall of 1917, this 371st was recognized as one of the top trained units in the entire United States Army. They would go on to serve with distinction in France, as the 81st did, and in France they would serve with the French Army, not with the United States, and they earned many decorations, and one of their number, Freddie Stow from Anderson, earned the Medal of Honor. Here is the 371st regimental flag that now is housed and exhibited at the Relic Room. Interesting enough, it was donated to the Relic Room in the 1920s and has been in our collection ever since. And we've brought it out with great pride to display for many years now. They became known as the Red Hand Regiment. They were part of the 83rd Division of the United States Army, all African Americans. And the 371st adopted the Red Hand, which was part of the French division they fought alongside. And the French took great pride that the 371st adopted this emblem. It was unofficial, but was recognized by everybody in the regiment. Now, training. Of course, rifle range was very important. Every soldier had to learn how to shoot, and this is what the ranges looked like as training began in the fall of 17. Trench, these troops had to learn how to dig trenches and how to set them up. That was another part of their training that was very important. And here you see a completed practice trench, similar to what they would find in France when they got there. And of course, the Lewis gun. The United States Army, of course, we were woefully unprepared when we declared war on Germany in April of 17. And while we built up the military industry, we had to use a lot of our allies' firearms because they had much more ready for use. And so this British Lewis gun was used by American troops here in practice and also in France. Now, as I indicated, the 81st and 371st were sent to Europe in the late spring, early summer of 1918. And after they left, the camp became a center for training artillery units. And this is an example of one on maneuvers at the camp. Another thing that was something you might not expect, in the summer of 18, some German prisoners of war were brought here. It's hard that we don't know how many exactly were actually part of this unit. We think about 100, 150 were here. They were used to help maintain the camp. And some of them probably also, as in World War II, would be used by farmers to help in the cultivation and harvesting of crops. Since we were in the war a short time, it's hard to estimate how much they really contributed to our war effort, but according to practices, all enlisted men of the enemy who were held as captives were required to work for the nation in which they were housed, as long as, quote unquote, they weren't used in military type work. Another important part of the Camp Jackson experience, of course, was recreation. And of course, for me, one of those interesting parts is athletics. And in Camp Jackson, as in most of these camps, all kinds of athletic competitions were held. Companies, regiments formed teams, and they had competitions. Boxing, of course, in the early 20th century was one of maybe the top spectator sports. And this is one of those boxing matches, I guess, between regiments. We don't know exactly who the competition was between, but you see all the troops around watching, probably also betting. Now, for me, another interesting thing is football. And if you know a little bit about football history, football, as we know it, was just beginning to start and have an impact in the South and to a larger degree in the nation as a whole. So regimental football teams, company teams were being formed at Camp Jackson. They had competitions. This is presumably the champions of the Camp Jackson competition in 1918. Some of them formed all-star teams, and they would go outside the camp to play other camps like Wadsworth in Spartanburg, the Navy Yard in Charleston, and even some of the universities and colleges that had teams still would compete against the Camp Jackson. And a very unusual kind of recreation, in a sense, or arts, is this gentleman by the name of Charles Birchfield. He was an Ohio native who was drafted in 1918 and sent to Camp Jackson. He was already studying to be an artist, and he painted somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 watercolors and pencil etchings of the camp and the outside areas around the Midlands. There are a few examples in collections around here. There's a few in Augusta at the Morris Museum of Art, and also up in Spartanburg. And the Gibbs Museum, which this image is from, has one of those as well. Within Columbia, the country was eager to have the whole nation support the war effort in every way possible. So this headline shows how one way in which the citizens of Columbia learned how to appreciate the Allies by having this event where they set up tables of all the Allied nations. So the French, the Belgians, the British were all represented, and people would come and be able to buy samples of the food that was traditions there and so forth. Within Columbia, of course, the troops would come, and when they had a day off to escape the routine of the camp, and many churches opened their doors to these, what became known as doughboys, provided them refreshments, places to read, meet young women. And of course, many of these churches and other civic organizations would send choirs to the camp. And for example, in September of 1917, a girls' choir did a performance at the camp, and as you might imagine, the young men were excited about that, and this would be repeated many times over throughout the history of Camp Jackson. This is a picture of a family here in Columbia demonstrating, as I like to say, some of the entertainment or how families would entertain soldiers. Now, there aren't any soldiers in this particular image, but I can imagine that troops often would enjoy a watermelon feast and seed fights like these women and the gentleman in the picture are. And of course, well, this example is a doughboy with his sister. He was from Colombia. It represents what often, there were many relationships that evolved between local women and doughboys, whether they were from South Carolina or beyond. Often this would result in marriages, and some of these soldiers ended up staying here after the war. Perhaps the most traumatic thing to occur during the war in the Columbia area and the nation as a whole was the flu pandemic of the fall of 1918. We're not sure exactly how it started, but it came to Camp Jackson. It starts to appear here in the late August and September of 1918. And by October, it would virtually shut down the entire state. So many people were afflicted with this. They canceled church services, cinemas, sporting events, because they didn't want the contagion to spread. Well, it did spread to the point where it was feared that it might completely shut the nation down. In the end, the pandemic saw about 340 doughboys die at the camp, an equal number in Columbia itself. Within South Carolina, we estimate maybe 10,000 perished. In the nation as a whole, one estimate is 600,000 Americans died. It was a huge catastrophe that fortunately spent itself by the end of October, and the nation and the world began recovering before the armistice on 11 November 1918. This is an event in history that has largely been ignored in our history books, and we need to reevaluate its impact with these new flus. There is some new studies being made about how the nation dealt with this, because they never did find an antidote. Basically, we understand that the flu just spent itself, got those that were the most vulnerable, and those that had the right genes managed to avoid it. So what happened after? Well, the fort was slowly demobilized. In 1919, about 40,000 troops were deactivated here. One of the units that was deactivated here was 371st. They had a major parade for them, welcoming them home. The camp was actually shut down completely in 1922. Most of the buildings were auctioned off and purchased by small businesses around the Midlands and elsewhere. And by 1924-25, there wasn't much left of Camp Jackson except for a few buildings. In 1926, the State Guard took over a portion of it and would use it as a training center in the summer. And this is a photograph I just received from a gentleman. His grandfather's in this image, showing a regiment in summer training in 1934. And the camp would remain basically a State Guard unit until 1939, when FDR was slowly rebuilding our armed forces and took it over again as a federal installation in 1939. In 1940, it was renamed Fort Jackson, and it has remained an integral part of South Carolina's social and economic well-being ever since. And this is a quick peek at what the exhibit entrance looks like. I hope you'll come to the Relic Room and see it. It's up through the summer of this year. We have some speakers coming in the summer. We have a gentleman from the museum who will be, Henry Howe, will be talking about an aspect of Camp Jackson's history in World War I. We'll have a gentleman from Florence coming to talk about Charles Birchfield, the artist, in August. So please look at our website. If you want more details, give me a call. We can provide you the times. We usually do these lunch and learns the last Friday of every month at noon, and they're free and open to the public. I appreciate your attention. Hope you all have a good afternoon. Thank you. Appreciate it.
stuff I didn't know about Fort Jackson there. I don't know about the rest of it. I didn't realize it was closed for that long. That's pretty incredible. We are out of time, so I think Rusty will just pass on song. I want to remind you that we do not have a meeting next week, Memorial Day. I hope that you will go enjoy yourselves in some other way than being here with us. But I wish you the best, and we'll see you the following Monday. That's all I can think of for today. Thank you.